alien princess gives up eternal life to bear a human's child, the enemy she once despised. The Xanthian Empire had stood for millennia, its power unrivaled across the stars. Princess Avara, the heir to this eternal dynasty, gazed out over the shimmering city below, her emerald skin glowing in the dying light of the twin suns. The landscape sprawled before her like a canvas painted with perfection, each towering spire and crystalline building a testament to her people's might. In a world where time itself bent to their will, where immortality was the birthright of her bloodline, Avara could not imagine anything, or anyone, that could challenge her. Yet there was a disturbance on the horizon, a flicker of something alien and insignificant: the humans. Her thoughts were interrupted by the low hum of a voice, familiar but no less irritating. Terrace, her royal advisor, approached with his usual calm. His blue skin reflected the golden hues of the palace, and his expression betrayed nothing. "Your Highness," he began, his voice smooth as the fabric of his robes, "another human delegation is expected tomorrow." Avara turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she met his gaze. "Humans," she said, her voice filled with a quiet disdain. "They've only just begun to reach the stars, and already they seek our attention. How tiresome." Terrace bowed slightly, acknowledging her words. "Indeed, Your Highness, but the Earth Coalition persists. They seek to establish diplomatic relations despite the limitations of their species." Avara's lips curled into a slight smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Diplomacy? For what purpose? They are nothing more than fleeting creatures who can't even comprehend the vastness of the universe." She stepped away from the balcony, turning to face the intricately carved walls of her chambers. What could they possibly want from us? What value could they offer? Terrace hesitated before answering. "The High Council suggests that we entertain their request. Their resources, though rudimentary, could serve a purpose. Even the most primitive species can be useful in certain circumstances." Avara flicked her hand dismissively, her dark gown swirling around her. "Very well," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "I shall grace them with my presence, though I expect little more than a waste of time. But mark my words, there will be no alliance between us." Terrace remained silent, knowing better than to argue further. But before he could bow and leave, Avara's gaze turned distant, her mind still on the humans. Something about them had begun to gnaw at her. Why, after all these centuries, did they still persist? She was far superior to them, of that she was certain. And yet, there was something unsettling in the way their eyes seemed to meet hers with determination. The next day, the Earth delegation arrived, their ships a small but determined presence against the grandeur of the Xanthian palace. Commander Rick Grayson led the group, his posture unyielding as they approached the palace gates. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had fought in wars, led battles, but nothing could prepare him for the moment he was about to face. As they entered the palace, Rick felt a mix of awe and unease. The walls were smooth, almost translucent, and the architecture defied everything he knew about gravity and structure. The palace was both beautiful and intimidating, an ancient monument to a people who had mastered the stars long before humanity had even begun to explore. But Rick had learned not to show awe in the face of the unknown. He was here on a mission, and nothing would distract him from his goal, securing a future for Earth among the stars. As they entered the grand hall, the sight of Princess Avara stopped Rick in his tracks. She sat on a raised throne, her presence undeniable, her silver hair cascading around her like a living storm. She was stunning, almost otherworldly in her beauty, and yet there was something cold about her, a detached grace that made her seem untouchable. Her emerald eyes swept over the delegation, and when they landed on Rick, a flicker of something unfamiliar passed across her face. It was fleeting, but it was there, a slight tightening of her expression, a barely perceptible pause. For a moment, the princess seemed less like an untouchable queen and more like a curious predator studying a new kind of prey. Rick met her gaze directly, his face calm but his heart racing. He had been briefed on the power and arrogance of the Xanthians. Yet in this moment he felt something shift between them, a silent challenge, an unspoken tension. He didn't bow as deeply as he should have. He didn't lower his eyes. He simply stood, steady and unafraid. Avara's voice broke the silence. "Welcome, Earth delegation," she said, her tone smooth but with an edge. "I trust you understand the honor of being in my presence." Rick didn't flinch. "Thank you for receiving us, Your Highness," he replied, his voice strong and unwavering. "We come in peace, seeking a partnership for the future of our people." Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, but her eyes never left his. "A partnership," she repeated, as though testing the word on her tongue. "You humans, always seeking something more than your kind deserve. Tell me, Commander Grayson, what makes you think you have anything to offer us?" Rick didn't hesitate. "We have something no one else has: determination, the will to survive, to adapt, to grow. We may be small, but we fight for what's ours, and that's why we're here." Avara raised an eyebrow. "How? Interesting. You speak of determination, but you are so fragile. Your lives are but brief sparks in the grand timeline of the universe." She studied him closely, as though sizing him up. "And yet you stand here before me unafraid." Rick met her gaze, his expression never wavering. "I've learned that fear is the enemy of progress. If we are to survive in this galaxy, we must face it head-on." For a moment, Avara was silent. The expression on her face shifted, a rare flicker of something approaching curiosity. Was it respect? It was impossible to say. But something was stirring within her, something she had not expected from a human. As the meeting continued, the tension between them was palpable. Avara toyed with her responses, her words sharp and dismissive, while Rick answered with quiet confidence, never backing down. It was clear to both of them that this meeting was far from ordinary. When it finally ended, the princess dismissed the delegation, but not before a final, almost imperceptible exchange of glances. Rick's gaze lingered on Avara for just a moment longer than necessary, and in that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't over, it was just beginning. As the doors closed behind them, Rick could feel the weight of what had just happened. There was something about Avara, something he couldn't quite place. She was more than just a royal princess. There was a fire in her, a fire he had seen in few people, human or alien. And though she hadn't shown it, he could feel that the encounter had affected her too. In the depths of her heart, Avara couldn't deny the growing curiosity. Humans, they were not what she had expected. The unseen fire. The following day, the sun barely touched the horizon when Princess Avara found herself standing on the balcony once again. The air was still, as if the entire palace was holding its breath. She had spent the night replaying the human delegation's visit in her mind, focusing on one face, Commander Rick Grayson. He had been different, not like the others. The usual human awe and nervousness were absent. Instead, his confidence had unnerved her. She had expected him to cower in the presence of Xanthian greatness, to look upon her with the reverence due a princess, a being who had lived for centuries while his people's lives were measured in mere decades. But instead, he had looked at her as an equal, his eyes unwavering, as if he were seeing something in her that she herself didn't understand. The thought troubled her more than it should have. "Your Highness, the human commander has requested a second meeting." Terrace's voice broke through her thoughts, smooth and cold as always. His presence was almost always unannounced, as though he could sense when Avara's mind was lost in places it shouldn't be. "Did he now?" Avara murmured, her voice betraying no emotion as she turned to face her advisor. Terrace nodded. "The delegation insists that this meeting will be of greater significance. It seems their leader wishes to continue the discussion. I've made arrangements for the garden this time, where the surroundings might better suit their simple tastes." Avara's lips twisted into a barely perceptible smile. The arrogance of these humans was both tiresome and amusing. "How quaint. Very well. I shall grace them with my presence once more, she said, her voice as cold as ice. But I expect no more than the same. The humans will beg for our attention, and I will dismiss them just as easily. As the Earth delegation arrived at the royal gardens, a quiet tension hung in the air. The garden was a place of serenity, with bioluminescent plants and exotic flora from across the galaxy, tended to by the finest Xanthian gardeners. The light shimmered off the iridescent flowers, their glow casting an ethereal light across the scene. Commander Rick Grayson stepped forward, his uniform a sharp contrast to the organic beauty surrounding him. His eyes took in the garden, but unlike many others who would be awestruck by the majesty of it, his focus was on the princess. There was no hesitation in his step, no fear in the way he met her gaze. Avara watched him approach, her posture regal as always. She had expected to feel the usual sense of superiority, the undeniable certainty that her people were far beyond these primitives. But there was something unsettling in the way he carried himself. The way he didn't fidget, didn't flinch. There was an almost defiant calm about him. "You've chosen an interesting setting," Rick said, bowing politely but not too deeply. "I can see why it would appeal to a species like yours, perfect symmetry, almost as if nature itself bows to you." Avara raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by his boldness. She had expected him to comment on the beauty of the garden or offer some mundane pleasantries. But his words, though respectful, carried a weight. He was challenging her in a way without even trying. "The garden is a reflection of Xanthian power," she said coolly, her voice like velvet. "A place where even the most fleeting species can be nurtured. Though I suppose for humans, fleeting is an understatement." Rick met her gaze without flinching, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Perhaps. But you see, Your Highness, there's something about us humans. We may only live for a fraction of the time that you do, but we learn faster, adapt faster, and we fight for what we want, even when we shouldn't." Her emerald eyes narrowed as she regarded him. "And you think that makes you worthy of Xanthian attention?" "I think it makes us worthy of a chance," Rick replied, his voice steady but carrying a spark of something deeper. For a brief moment, Avara saw something shift in his eyes, an intensity, a fire that no human had ever shown her before. It was something she hadn't expected to see in anyone so brief. Something about his confidence, the way he faced her without fear, had caught her off guard. It was the first time in a long time that she felt challenged, and she didn't like it. She was about to respond, to crush his words with the weight of her centuries of superiority, but then something stopped her. She couldn't quite place it, but there was a hesitation in the air, a strange connection between them. Instead of speaking, she gestured for him to walk with her, a silent invitation. The garden stretched out in all directions, and Avara began to walk among the glowing plants, her silver hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Rick matched her pace, walking by her side, though the silence between them was thick with tension. They walked for a few moments, the only sounds the soft rustling of the bioluminescent plants and the distant hum of the palace. Avara couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something beyond her control. As the princess of the Xanthian Empire, she had always been in control, always in charge. But with Rick, she felt uncertain. "You're not like the others," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet air. Rick glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I told you, Your Highness, I'm not here to bow before you. I'm here to speak as equals, to show you that we're not as small as you think." Avara stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes searched his face, but it was clear that she wasn't simply looking at him. She was trying to understand him, something she hadn't done with a human in centuries. "You don't fear me," she said softly, almost to herself. Rick didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened. "Why should I? You're just a person, like anyone else." Her heart skipped a beat. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not in all her centuries of life. No one had ever seen her as just another person. Avara's gaze faltered for just a moment. The weight of her crown, the pressure of her immortality, felt heavier than ever. She could almost hear the silent ticking of time that she had never considered before. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost fragile. Rick's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment the walls between them seemed to vanish. "Maybe we're not so different after all," he said. The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in her life, Avara wondered if she was ready to face what they might mean. The tension between them was palpable, and as they continued their walk through the garden, Avara couldn't help but feel that this was no ordinary diplomatic meeting. Something was shifting, something she couldn't control, and it was terrifying. Perhaps it wasn't the humans who had underestimated the Xanthians. Perhaps it was her. The spark of doubt. Princess Avara stood in the heart of the royal gardens, the bioluminescent plants casting their soft glow across her skin. The air felt thick, charged with an electricity that she couldn't quite explain. She had dismissed the human delegation the day before with her usual grace, but now she felt uneasy. Commander Rick Grayson had left an impression, one she couldn't shake. The thought of him lingered in her mind like an unexpected whisper in the dark. She had seen many humans come and go throughout her long life, their short-lived ambitions fleeting in comparison to the grandeur of her people. Yet Rick, he was different. His eyes, filled with something beyond fear, had sparked a strange curiosity within her. Respect. Could she even feel that for someone so inferior? She pushed the thought aside, but the more she tried to dismiss it, the more it gnawed at her. As she paced the marble floors of her chambers, Avara found herself growing restless. The last few days had been filled with formalities, meetings with diplomats and advisors, but none of it mattered. None of it mattered when she couldn't stop thinking about him. "Your Highness, the human delegation has requested another audience." Terrace's voice broke through the quiet hum of her thoughts. His tall, slender frame appeared in the doorway, his blue skin almost glowing under the light of the room's crystal chandeliers. Avara's eyes flicked up to meet his. "More requests? How many times must I entertain them?" Tara stepped inside, his face unreadable. "It seems Commander Grayson himself insists on meeting again. He claims there is more to discuss. He says that it could be urgent." Avara's lips curled into a small smile, one that did not reach her eyes. "Urgent? Does he believe I care for the human plight so much that I will attend to them at their beck and call?" Terrace bowed his head slightly. "Perhaps he's just persistent, Your Highness." Avara stood from her seat, her movements fluid as she made her way to the balcony. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. "I am not impressed by persistence," she murmured, her voice distant. "Nor do I have the time to indulge a species whose lives are a blink of an eye compared to ours. Why must they insist on wasting my time?" Terrace remained quiet for a moment, allowing the tension to build before speaking again. "But, Your Highness, could it be that the humans possess something that we do not?" Avara turned sharply, her emerald eyes flashing with irritation. "You're speaking in riddles, Terrace. What are you implying?" He held her gaze steady as ever. "What I mean, Your Highness, is that they might have more to offer than we realize. Perhaps there is something about them, something you have yet to discover." Avara felt a flicker of something deep inside her, something she could not name. Terrace's words pierced through her indifference, but she didn't want to acknowledge it. "I'll meet with them again," she said finally, her voice cold. "But only to confirm once and for all that these humans have nothing of value." Later that day, the royal gardens buzzed with activity as the Earth delegation arrived for their second meeting. The air felt different this time. There was a certain weight to the moment, a silence that hung between the two sides, as if both knew this meeting would not be like the last. Rick Grayson entered the garden first, as if the very grounds were an extension of his resolve. His posture was no longer stiff with formality. Now he moved with purpose, as though every step he took brought him closer to something significant. Avara noticed this immediately. There was no hesitation in his movements. He met her gaze as he approached, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't fear. It wasn't reverence. It was curiosity, respect. But even that felt different, more real. "You seem to enjoy this garden, Princess," Rick said, his voice calm, but with an edge of something she hadn't heard before, something like challenge. Avara's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It reflects the grandeur of the Xanthian people," she said, her voice as cold as the stone beneath her feet. "Unlike your fleeting species, we tend to the beauty around us, nurturing it with the patience of immortality." Rick looked at the plants, their bioluminescence flickering in the soft evening light, then back at her. "I can see that. But tell me, Princess, why nurture something you won't live long enough to fully see? Surely, a species like yours would have no use for something that takes too long to grow." His words hit Avara like a pulse of energy. She felt the weight of his challenge, though his tone remained polite. But what he was saying wasn't just a question about the garden, it was a question about her people, her entire existence. "Humans can't understand what it means to take time with something," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Your lives are too short. You rush through everything, never stopping to truly appreciate what it means to endure, to live beyond the limits of time." Rick stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Perhaps that's true, but we also don't waste time pretending that we have forever. We make each moment matter because we know it won't last. Maybe that's why we fight harder, why we adapt faster, and maybe that's why we're not the ones standing still." The words hit her harder than she expected. For a long moment, Avara didn't respond. She couldn't. She was no longer entirely sure of her own beliefs. She had lived so long, had seen civilizations rise and fall, that she had come to believe in the certainty of time, that everything eventually fades. But Rick wasn't like that. He didn't believe in waiting. He didn't see life as a slow, endless march toward eternity. He saw it as something fleeting, something worth fighting for. And that stirred something inside her. "Perhaps we can learn from each other," Rick said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was something in it now, something that felt different than before. There was no mockery, no arrogance. There was just an invitation to understand. Avara's mind raced. She wasn't used to being invited to understand. She had spent millennia observing but never truly connecting. She had seen her people thrive by controlling everything, by having the luxury of endless time to shape their futures. Yet, here was a human who had so little time, and yet seemed to grasp something that she had long lost. For the first time in centuries, Avara felt a stir of uncertainty, a crack in the fortress of her mind. Was there something she had missed? Something humans understood better than she? She glanced at him, her expression hardening again. "Do not flatter yourself, Commander," she said, her voice cold once more. "This conversation is over. You have nothing to offer us." But as she turned to walk away, her heart raced, not from the usual certainty, but from the unfamiliar stir of something else. Doubt. The seeds had been planted, and as she walked away, Avara couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at her chest. Something was changing. Whether she liked it or not, Commander Rick Grayson was not a human to be dismissed. And the more she tried to push him away, the more she realized that the challenge he presented might be the most dangerous one she had ever faced. Because for the first time in her life, the concept of mortality, of something finite, didn't seem like something to be feared. It felt real. The unlikely alliance. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a cool, purple twilight over the Xanthian palace. Princess Avara stood in front of the grand windows of her chambers, gazing out at the sprawling city below. Her emerald eyes reflected the distant glow of the bioluminescent lights that dotted the palace grounds, but her mind was far from the beauty before her. It was consumed by the human commander, Rick Grayson. The encounter in the garden had lingered in her thoughts longer than she cared to admit. There had been a shift, an undeniable change in the air when they spoke. Despite her best efforts to dismiss it, the interaction had not been what she expected. She was used to commanding attention, to controlling every situation, but with him, Rick, there was something different. Respect, curiosity, a challenge. It was maddening. For the first time in centuries, Avara was no longer certain of her superiority. A soft chime broke her reverie. Terrace's voice came through, calm and composed as always. "Your Highness, a new development has occurred. The Vorkath are attacking. They've breached the palace grounds." Avara's spine stiffened, her mind snapping into focus. The Vorkath were an ancient enemy of the Xanthian Empire, thought extinct, their presence in the galaxy erased from history. Yet here they were, appearing without warning, as if the galaxy itself had decided to test her. Before she could respond, Terrace continued, his tone more urgent. "They've attacked the Royal Guard, Your Highness. The palace is in lockdown. We must move immediately." The sound of alarms echoed through the hallways of the palace, blaring a harsh warning to all within. Princess Avara, with her flawless composure, moved swiftly through the halls, her footsteps echoing against the cold stone floors. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who had brought the Vorkath back? Why attack now? But above all, there was one question that gnawed at her. Where was Rick Grayson? As she rounded a corner, a sharp voice reached her ears, cutting through the chaos of the guards. "Commander Grayson has just arrived, Your Highness. He's requesting to speak with you." Avara's eyebrows arched in surprise. Of all the times for the human to return, this was certainly unexpected. What could he possibly want? She turned to find Rick standing in the hallway, his expression as determined as ever. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn from battle, but there was no fear in his eyes. If anything, the chaos around him only seemed to steel his resolve. "Princess," Rick said with a curt nod, his voice steady despite the commotion. "The palace is under attack. We need to act fast." Avara regarded him for a moment, taking in his disheveled appearance. Despite everything, he remained unshaken. It was a quality she had never before seen in a human. The others, the weak ones, would have been panicked. But not Rick. His calmness in the face of death was unsettling. "Why are you here?" Avara asked, her voice cold but not unkind. "The palace is secured. This is a Xanthian matter." Rick's eyes met hers, his gaze unwavering. "The Vorkath are mercenaries. They're being paid by someone. This isn't a random attack, it's deliberate. You're being used, Princess." Avara felt a flicker of something inside her, a mix of anger and something she couldn't name. She had no time for the humans, endless need to involve themselves in matters that didn't concern them. "Why should I trust this human?" she thought. But something about his certainty caught her off guard. He had been right about the humans' resilience, about their tenacity. There was no arrogance in his voice now, no bravado. Just the quiet assurance of someone who had faced worse and come out alive. "You misunderstand," Avara said, her voice low but controlled. "This is a Xanthian issue. We do not need the help of humans." Rick's eyes never wavered. "You might not need help, but you do need someone who knows how to fight. Your palace is under siege, Princess. And if we don't act fast, we'll all be dead before your precious guards can do anything about it." The tension in the air was thick, but it was clear that Rick wasn't backing down. Avara found herself, for the first time in her long life, considering the possibility that the human commander might be right. A sound echoed through the hallway, distant explosions, followed by the unmistakable crackling of energy weapons. The Vorkath had reached the inner sanctum. "Fine," she said, her voice hardening into resolve. "You will fight with us. But know this, Commander. If you fail, I will personally see that your people are held accountable." Rick gave a small nod. Understood. The palace halls had erupted into chaos as the royal guards fought valiantly to hold their ground against the Vorkath mercenaries. Avara and Rick made their way through the corridors, the sounds of distant clashes growing louder with each step. We need to get to the control room, Avara said, her mind already calculating their next moves. There's a secondary entrance that will allow us to activate the palace's defenses. Rick nodded, his face set in determination. Lead the way, but we'll need a way to fight back before they reach it. Rick's eyes met hers, his gaze unwavering. The Vorkath are mercenaries. They're being paid by someone. This isn't a random attack, it's deliberate. You're being used, Princess. Avara felt a flicker of something inside her, a mix of anger and something she couldn't name. She had no time for the humans, endless need to involve themselves in matters that didn't concern them. Why should I trust this human? She thought. But something about his certainty caught her off guard. He had been right about the humans' resilience, about their tenacity. There was no arrogance in his voice now, no bravado. Just the quiet assurance of someone who had faced worse and come out alive. You misunderstand, Avara said, her voice low but controlled. This is a Xanthian issue. We do not need the help of humans. Rick's eyes never wavered. You might not need help, but you do need someone who knows how to fight. Your palace is under siege, Princess. And if we don't act fast, we'll all be dead before your precious guards can do anything about it. The tension in the air was thick, but it was clear that Rick wasn't backing down. Avara found herself, for the first time in her long life, considering the possibility that the human commander might be right. A sound echoed through the hallway, distant explosions, followed by the unmistakable crackling of energy weapons. The Vorkath had reached the inner sanctum. Fine, she said, her voice hardening into resolve. You will fight with us, but know this, Commander. If you fail, I will personally see that your people are held accountable. Rick gave a small nod. Understood. The palace halls had erupted into chaos as the royal guards fought valiantly to hold their ground against the Vorkath mercenaries. Avara and Rick made their way through the corridors, the sounds of distant clashes growing louder with each step. We need to get to the control room, Avara said, her mind already calculating their next moves. There's a secondary entrance that will allow us to activate the palace's defenses. Rick nodded, his face set in determination. Lead the way, but we'll need a way to fight back before they reach it. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.